Bernie Sanders had an epic rant on the floor where he was, doing his arm waving thing and yelling, and I think quite rightly, at Republicans who were aghast that, people who are unemployed, who are poor, who are lower income working folks would get like a tiny bit of extra money, you know what I mean? But they didn't mind giving $500 billion to these big corporations. And by the way, I have a suggestion for an oversight board to oversee who gets that money. I'm going to suggest Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders as the two senators, and 3 House members, Adam Schiff, Val Demings, because, yeah, she used to be police, so she can check what you're doing, and Katie Porter. That's my panel. You guys pick your own favorite panel.
What you just saw there was Joy Reid, one of Bernie Sanders' most long-running critics, praising Bernie Sanders first for his speech on the Senate floor, in which he was defending certain worker protection provisions in the uninsurance package, in the coronavirus relief package, from a number of Republicans who were attempting to gut those protections and successfully doing so. And then second, you saw Joy Reid taking it even a step further to argue that Bernie Sanders should be one of the people leading the panel to decide how corporations should be spending their money. And I think this actually goes to a deeper point, which is that a number of people, both across the mainstream media and regular people, just around the country, are beginning to realize that in many ways, Bernie Sanders is the man for this moment. That Bernie Sanders' policies, not only his policies have been vindicated, but his very style of politics as well. You'll notice there in that clip, Joy Reid was praising Bernie Sanders even for his style, which she has criticized in the past, saying that his screaming and hand-waving was very appealing and was very good in this moment. Now, again, that's something which she has criticized in the past, and Bernie supporters have rightly gone after her for the way in which she made those criticisms. But even she is acknowledging that in this moment, that is exactly what America needs. And again, it's also about policy, because this is an article out from the New York Times that the coronavirus may add billions of dollars to the nation's healthcare bill. And let me make it bigger for you so you can see this part here. Insurance premiums could spike as much as 40% next year, according to a new analysis. And when you go through and read this article, what you'll see is that basically Bernie Sanders was absolutely right, because what we're seeing right now, actually, let me go ahead and show you this graph. I was gonna wait to show it to you, but this graph right here, I showed it in a previous video once, but this is uninsurance claims since basically the 1970s. And spike. In the past week, we've seen so many people filing for uninsurance, but the other thing that we're seeing is a whole lot of people being kicked off of their insurance plans literally in the middle of a pandemic, when we need as many people on insurance as possible, right? And so what we are seeing is an absolute clear example of how Bernie Sanders and his proposals of Medicare for all, while they may not have been able to completely stop the coronavirus pandemic, would have been able to mitigate at least a lot of the damage, a lot of the effects going into it. Because, guys, do you even realize how expensive it is to treat coronavirus? So roughly the estimates are about $10,000 for an individual who goes to the hospital without complications, and it's estimated to be about $20,000 if there are complications, and sometimes upwards of that. One woman was reportedly charged, and she did not have insurance, $34,000 for her coronavirus treatment. Guys, we are talking about people going bankrupt over getting coronavirus when thousands and actually not even thousands, millions of people are likely to get this thing. And when we're talking about millions of people suddenly going off their insurance because they're being fired and laid off from their work, it shows just how right Bernie Sanders is, and not just on the issue of Medicare for all, but also on some of the regulations which Bernie Sanders wanted to implement on employers, which is that Bernie Sanders wanted to make it so that employers could only fire you for lack of basically talent or ability when it comes to actually doing your job. That's a weird way of putting it. But my point is this: they wouldn't have just been so easily able to lay off workers immediately as soon as they had to shut down. The companies would have had to show that under Bernie Sanders' bills and ideas, which he fought for and were in his policy package back when he was running in 2015, those companies who were laying off workers would have shown that they went through the best efforts that they possibly could to pay workers out as long as they could, before they were able to lay them off. That is something that Bernie Sanders has been campaigning on. In other words, the ideas that Bernie Sanders has been campaigning on for all this time are the exact ideas, the exact system of government which would have best been able to prevent not just the coronavirus pandemic from spreading, but also to help prevent this impending economic collapse, which we actually are experiencing right now. Because the other thing is, Bernie Sanders also, when it comes to paid sick leave, Bernie Sanders has said that companies should all be required to offer paid sick leave. Did you know this country, 4 in 10 hourly paid workers do not have any kind of paid sick leave? 4 in 10. Yeah, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about here is possibly part of the reason why Joy Reid has felt free maybe to do this is actually that she feels possibly that this campaign is over, that Bernie Sanders is, maybe done for. Bernie Sanders isn't a threat anymore when it comes to winning the nomination. And so she feels like, yeah, she's free to praise Bernie Sanders. Now, one sort of problem with that is that Joe Biden is clearly not a good candidate when it comes to running up against Donald Trump. Not just because he doesn't have the vision, doesn't have the policies to actually deal with and handle the crisis, but also because there's just no enthusiasm for it. And perhaps maybe that lack of enthusiasm is partially because he doesn't have the vision to deal with the crisis that we're seeing right now. When you look at this comparison chart, this is Donald Trump's fans in terms of enthusiasm versus Joe Biden. You can see here 53% of Trump supporters are very enthusiastic to vote for him, 32% somewhat, and then 14% not particularly. For Joe Biden, only 24% of voters are very enthusiastic for voting for him. About almost 49% are somewhat enthusiastic, and then nearly 30%, 26% of voters are not at all enthusiastic about, and these are people who are saying that they're probably going to vote, that are leaning to vote for Joe Biden. Guys, that's not good. Now, you might hear that and think, well, hold on. It doesn't matter if a voter is enthusiastic to vote for someone, just that they go out and vote. The person who love that candidate, their vote still counts as one versus the candidate who, versus the voter who goes out and, just sort of cast their ballot casually. You're right, but there's 2 reasons why enthusiasm really matters. First of all, those voters who are enthusiastic are more likely to go out and vote. So if there's a hiccup, if suddenly their car breaks down, if suddenly, the weather isn't good, or all kinds of different reasons why people might not go out and vote. And by the way, it's actually not a joke when it comes to weather. Weather has been shown to affect elections, actually. Some kind of hiccup comes up, they're more likely to push through it. If their car breaks down, they'll call a friend and be like, can you take me down to the polling station? And guys, in close elections, that's going to be the kind of thing that really matters. And the second reason is enthusiastic voters are more likely to try to persuade other people to go out and vote for their preferred candidate as well. And that's going to be something which obviously can help drive up voter turnout. And now, the other concern when it comes to Donald Trump versus Joe Biden is that Donald Trump's approval rating has really been rising, really been going up during this coronavirus crisis. Now, part of that is it seems to be similar to a kind of rally around the flag effect, which is that there's a crisis and people look to a leader and they see, well, at least Donald Trump is doing something. And where is Joe Biden? We don't know. Nobody really knows. I mean, now he's been doing more interviews, but I mean, what is he really doing? What is he really contributing to the conversation? He isn't really contributing anything. And guys, what you need to understand about public opinion is that if people don't see an alternative, then they're oftentimes just going to favor the thing that is, the status quo, because they'll look at it and think, well, that's what things are. Things seem okay, they might think. And so they'll say, yeah, I like it. I agree with that, because they can't think of another way to do it. And so what you need to do is present an alternative approach, an alternative way of solving the crisis and also solving the problems, and allow Americans to then choose between those alternatives. That's what Bernie Sanders is doing, but it's not what Joe Biden is doing. Instead, Joe Biden is wanting to lay back because he believes that the the legislators should be allowed to decide, how things should go when it comes to presenting an alternative vision. Right? Joe Biden wants Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to lead the Democratic response to the coronavirus, not himself. But guys, that's not going to work. That's not going to be the thing which is going to allow American voters to actually have a choice and allow them to sort of recognize that, oh, I actually don't like the things that Donald Trump is doing. Instead of them saying, well, things seem, like, okay, I mean, it's a terrible thing, they might say, but at least Donald Trump is doing something, so sure, I support him. And this is really leading to Donald Trump's job approval rating really shooting up in this more recent poll. Donald Trump at 49% approval, really, really going up. And when it comes to this is sort of the 538 aggregate. Donald Trump's approval ratings are more or less the best that they've been ever since basically the first month after he got inaugurated. This is his whole time period. So Donald Trump's approval rating right now, guys, is really, really good, at least comparatively, right now. And so Joe Biden needs to do a lot better. And quite frankly, like I was saying, Joe Biden just isn't the man for this moment. It's Bernie Sanders. And I think that even as I showed you that clip earlier, even some of Bernie Sanders' most fierce critics are beginning to recognize that. Even if they're like, well, I don't necessarily agree with Bernie Sanders, they might admit that Bernie Sanders, what he brings to the table, both rhetorically, stylistically, and policy-wise, is the exact thing which can meet this crisis and can meet this moment. So anyway, that's the video. That's just what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. If you liked the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.